Do I get paid if I'm on call? Imagine this. You finish your regular shift, but your boss says, "Stay available tonight in case we need you." You're at home, waiting by the phone, or maybe you can't leave town because you might be called in. You start to wonder, do I get paid just for being on call? It's a common question, especially in healthcare, IT support, maintenance, and emergency services. The rules aren't always clear because federal law doesn't use the phrase on call directly. Instead, the law looks at whether your free time is truly your own. In this video, we'll break it down step by step. We'll explain what the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, says, how courts decide if on-call time is hours worked, the difference between being on-site versus off-site, state laws that add protections, and what workers can do if they think they're being shortchanged, the FLSA, and the concept of hours worked. The Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, doesn't explicitly mention on-call time, but it does require employers to pay for all hours worked. The U.S. Department of Labor and courts interpret this phrase to include any time when an employee is required to remain on duty, or so restricted that they can't use the time for their own purposes. So the key question is, are you free to use your time, or are you effectively still working? If you're at the workplace on standby, that's almost always paid. If you're at home but constantly restricted, it may count as work. If you're free to do as you please with minimal restrictions, it usually doesn't count. Example: a firefighter required to stay at the firehouse while on call must be paid. A nurse who can stay at home but needs to answer a phone call once or twice a night may not be paid for the waiting time, only for actual hours worked, on-site versus off-site on call. One of the biggest distinctions is whether you're required to remain on-site or can wait off-site. On-site on call. If you must stay at the employer's premises, the time is almost always compensable. You're not free to use the time for personal activities. Off-site on call. If you can stay at home or elsewhere, the analysis becomes trickier. Courts look at how many restrictions your employer imposes. Example: a repair technician required to sit at the job site just in case is working, even if no repairs are needed. But if the technician can go home and simply needs to carry a cell phone, the waiting time may not be paid. How restrictions affect payment courts and the Department of Labor look at restrictions on your personal time. The more restricted you are, the more likely you must be paid. Factors include response time. If you must respond within 5 minutes, you probably can't go far or relax. That leans toward paid time. If you have 45 minutes, you may still enjoy personal freedom. Geographic limits. If you can't leave town, can't attend events, or must stay close to work, the restriction makes time more like work. Frequency of calls. If you're called constantly, it feels like working. If calls are rare, the waiting time may be unpaid. Impact on personal life. Courts ask, can you use the time for hobbies, errands, or family? If not, it may be compensable. Example: a hospital requires a doctor to remain within 10 minutes of the facility and carry a pager. Courts may consider this restriction severe enough to require payment for the waiting time. State laws and extra protections. Some states add protections beyond the FLSA. California has reporting time pay and strict rules on standby. If workers are too restricted, time may count as work. New York requires certain industries like healthcare to compensate for standby time if it limits personal freedom. Oregon has strong wage enforcement and may treat restricted on-call time as compensable. Example: In California, security guards required to live on site and respond when alarms go off were awarded pay for all hours on standby, not just the moments of active work. Overtime and on-call hours. If on-call time counts as hours worked, it also counts toward overtime. Once you exceed 40 hours in a week, additional hours must be paid at time and a half.
这是确定.
If your employer doesn't include on-call hours that should be compensable, you may be missing overtime pay. Example: a maintenance worker's 10 hours of restricted standby time push total hours to 45. The extra 5 must be paid at the overtime rate. Real-world cases. Case 1. Firefighters in Arizona required to remain at the station were awarded pay for all standby hours. Case 2. Nurses in Texas on pager duty were found not entitled to pay for waiting time because they could shop, dine, or rest until called. Case 3. Security guards in California forced to stay on the employer's property won full pay for on-call hours since they couldn't leave or use the time freely. Case 4. An IT worker required to carry a phone and respond within 5 minutes argued for on-call pay. Courts agreed that the extreme response time left little personal freedom. These cases show how facts matter. Restrictions, response time, and employer control make the difference. What employers can and can't do. Employers can require you to be available by phone. Pay only for time actually worked if restrictions are light. Employers cannot. Require strict response times without paying. Force you to stay on site unpaid. Ignore overtime if on-call time counts as hours worked. Example: a hotel maintenance worker required to sleep on site to respond to emergencies must be paid because their personal freedom is limited. What workers can do. If you're unsure about on-call pay, here are steps. 1. Review company policy. Handbooks often explain on-call pay rules. 2. Check restrictions. If your employer's requirements prevent you from using your time freely, you may be entitled to pay. 3. Track hours. Document when you're on call, how many calls you receive, and how restricted you are. 4. Check state law. Some states have stricter rules than federal law. 5. File complaints. Contact the U.S. Department of Labor or your state labor agency if you believe pay was withheld. Example: a home health aide in Oregon tracked her constant pager calls and proved she was effectively working 60 hours a week. She won back pay for overtime. The bigger picture. On-call work blurs the line between job and personal life. Employers benefit from having workers available, but the law balances that with the worker's right to use personal time freely. The more control the employer exerts, the more likely the time is compensable. Understanding these rules matters. Too many workers assume on-call means unpaid, but that's not always true. Wage claims and lawsuits have shown that restricted standby time can and should be paid. So, do you get paid if you're on call? It depends. Under the FLSA, if your employer controls your time so much that you can't use it freely, the hours must be paid. On-site standby is almost always compensable. Off-site on-call may or may not be, depending on restrictions like response time and geographic limits. State laws like those in California and New York often provide extra protections. The bottom line, being on-call doesn't automatically mean unpaid. If your personal freedom is restricted, you may be entitled to wages and even overtime. If this video helped clarify your rights, share it with coworkers. The more workers know about on-call rules, the harder it is for employers to take advantage.